Just over 2 weeks to go until the general election, and we are joined now by the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, live from Westminster. Mr Raab, good morning to you.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming on, Foreign Secretary. We appreciate it. We haven't had many of the Tory big dogs, not least your leader, who keeps bottling us, so we appreciate it. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
I want to talk to you. We're obviously going to talk about President Trump and NATO in just a moment, but I just want to talk to you about the comments by Dave Merritt, whose son, Jack, was killed at London Bridge on Friday by Usman Khan. The Prime Minister and other politicians, but the Prime Minister in particular, has been accused of politicising what happened and coming under attack. Friends and families, you know, particularly Jack Merritt's father, concerned about using his son's death to talk about sentencing regimes, automatic early release. Dave Merritt has said, please don't politicise my son's death. Is Boris Johnson guilty of doing that?
No, I don't think so. I think every time any politician comes on the airwaves, we're asked that question by the media, and I understand why. But I would just say this, our hearts go out to the families of the victims. And the first priority we've got as a government is to prevent and reduce the risk of having further families going through the anguish and the suffering that they are, which is why, for us, the first priority is to make sure that whether it's policing powers, policing counter-terrorism policing numbers, but also the question of sentencing, that we're taking no risks and we're reducing the risk as far as you reasonably can in a free society.
Okay. And he has said, do not use this as an opportunity to introduce more draconian sentencing. But do you think that that is inevitable?
Well, you'll remember the debate after 7/7 and 9/11. We certainly have never been talking about extended periods of pre-charge detention, identity cards. We abolished them. But I think when you've had an individual like Mr. Khan convicted of serious criminal offences, all the due process that you'd expect in the British justice system, it's quite right for us to say that we want to make sure, when the case has been proven fairly, that we've got the sentencing arrangements in place to protect the public. And I'm afraid we've got to do that, and it's a clear difference in approach between us and the Labour Party or any of the other parties, because we're saying we will not take any unnecessary risks, and we do want to increase sentences to protect the public, and that is our first duty as a government.
What the public want to know, Mr Raab, is this: why do we let convicted Al-Qaeda and ISIS terrorists out at all? We have 74 prisoners in this country, including the Yorkshire Ripper and the people that killed the soldier Lee Rigby. They have life without parole tariffs, whole life tariffs. Why do we not apply those to the most dangerous terrorists on planet Earth, given that we've already seen that not just Usman Khan, but another member of his group, both, when they got out, reoffended. One committed multiple murder, and the other one was planning multiple murder and got a 20-year mandatory sentence. Why do we let them out at all?
I think it's a perfectly reasonable challenge, which is why we've taken the measures we're taking. Of course, there are some offences that are less serious than others, but for the serious ones, we've been clear. We think there should be a 14-year minimum sentence. We were the ones that introduced risk-based release at the two third points rather than Labour's halfway automatic release. And we are saying, and on this I agree with you, Piers, that there are some offenders where we will struggle to be satisfied because of the seriousness of their offences, because of their track record, that they can be released safely, and in those circumstances we will change the law to make sure that the public protection comes first and that they aren't released.
So can we, just to clarify, we can expect, if you win the election, that the Conservative government will introduce whole life tariffs for Al-Qaeda and ISIS convicted terrorists in this country in some circumstances?
We've been very clear that we would introduce, for the most serious terrorist offences, a minimum 14-year period there, and we've also said that for some, yes, you're right, life should mean life, and that's partly about public protection, but I think it's also, and this was, I think you hinted at in your question, also about public confidence in the system.
Hang on.
But above all...
But that, when you say the very worst cases, you're I mean, you know, let's be clear about this. You're talking about when they have committed murder, aren't you? And we have, for instance, the murderers of Lee Rigby serving whole life sentences for that, the worst terrorist offences. I think what Piers is referring to is those that may have been convicted of plotting. There is a call in some cases, not in all, certainly, in some cases, to not let them out. And I think, you know, we need to be clear from you whether you're talking about whole-life terrorists, which already exist for convicted murderers, or whether you're going to apply that more broadly.
Well, you started off, Susanna, saying that we shouldn't have knee-jerk draconian laws, and I can't legislate on air for each individual case, but what I can say is that we're absolutely clear that for the most serious offences, whether it's the conduct of the operational attack or it's the plotting, which can often be the most serious aspect of a terrorist conspiracy, we think that there will be some cases, and they'll have to be decided by a court. That's the justice system we have in this country, and rightly so, but we do think that there will be cases which don't apply at present, where a whole life order should apply, and where life should mean life. But our guiding principle will be to protect the public, and that's a dividing line, I think, in the offer that the Labour Party are making and what the Conservatives are saying. We will not allow public protection to be put at risk.
OK, I agree with you about that. I think there should be whole-life tariffs for these al-Qaeda and ISIS convicted terrorists, particularly in Usman Khan's case. He admitted the offence originally. He made no attempt to even deny it. However, that does, of course, put you completely at odds with Dave Merritt, whose son Jack has just been killed, whose son Jack was obviously campaigning for prisoner rehabilitation. And he says this: he doesn't want a world used on the back of his son's death where we lock up and throw the key away. He doesn't want indeterminate sentences. So what you're saying, which I agree with, is completely at odds with what the father of Jack Merritt is saying. So what would you say to him?
Well, first of all, we've been looking at this. If you look at our manifesto, we talked about increased sentences for serious crime. We talked about a root and branch review of the parole board before this case. But this case does bring into sharp relief the issue of public protection. And I appreciate it's very difficult, and my heart goes out to that family. But as I said at the outset, our job in government, and often we have to do difficult things, is to make sure we reduce the risk to public protection, and frankly to reduce the risk that there are more families going through the pain that this family is going through right now.
Dominic Raab, it would be the case, wouldn't it, that with any serious criminal, you would completely eliminate the risk if you kept them in prison for the rest of their life. But Jack Merritt was campaigning for rehabilitation. He had faith in the fact that people can change. And I'm sure through government programmes, you can prove that people can change. In this event, it was catastrophic. Who knows? I mean, we are not clear why this guy was let out and wasn't properly monitored. But surely you can also argue a case, can you not, that there is public protection served through rehabilitating people and changing their minds? Otherwise, you would have to acknowledge that government programmes are failing every day.
No, I agree with the principle of rehabilitation for less serious offences, and of course that's going to be very important for all sorts of crime. But fundamentally, in this case, if you look at Mr. Khan, I think it's very difficult to see, given all the programmes he went through, the idea that he would have been rehabilitated. And in the last analysis, my duty, the Prime Minister's duty, the Conservative government's duty is going to, and this is the way we view it, is to protect the public and reduce the risk that we see more of these tragic cases. And I'm afraid Susanna, I can't make any apology for that. As much as I, of course, listen to the comments of the families in individual cases, we've got a broader duty to the public, and we've got to discharge that. And it's only this Prime Minister and the Conservatives that are living up and standing up for that.